It's a huge pleasure being here this afternoon. I'm really, really privileged to be here. Those of you who are perceptive, who've got good ears, might notice that I'm not actually a native Harach. And the name might also be a giveaway. In fact, I'm a poor Englishman who managed to find his way to Edinburgh about 20 years ago, lucky enough to then marry a Scot, and then in the last 4 years have been even luckier to be brought out to the Outer Hebrides to build and to run a whiskey distillery. Now, how lucky is that? So, what I'm going to do this afternoon is I'm going to tell you our story, a little bit about the background to building the Isle of Harris Distillery, and walk you all the way through it to bring you up to date with where we are today. What I'm hoping is that as we go through a lot of information, there might be something that triggers an idea or a spark of interest in all of you. You might think, oh, there's something perhaps in that I might have a go at. Or, oh, there's maybe an opportunity that perhaps would suit me in my future career. So do please pay attention. There's a written test at the end, you'll be pleased to hear. And I also understand that the conference theme is about links and connections. Now that's really interesting because at the heart of what we're doing at the Isle of Harris Distillery are connections. First of all, creating a connection amongst our team of people who are going to be working in the distillery. And two of those are here today. So we've got Kenny McLean, who's our production manager, and Shona McLeod, who's our guest team manager. And I'll explain the meaning of that title as we go along. And they are native Harach, you'll be pleased to hear, and will also be available afterwards if you have any questions about the presentation. So, let's see if this works. Clicking any direction? Okay. So, this is how to build a malt whiskey distillery, and this is the part at which we say, don't try this at home. There are 8 things you might need to build a distillery, and I suggest you might start with an idea. And the reason for that, if you want to start any business, you have got to understand that the world is full of products and services that are probably already being delivered to consumers and customers around the world. So if you're going to start something new, how is yours going to be different? So for example, in our industry, in the malt whiskey industry, there are 115 working distilleries in Scotland. And as we speak, there are 20 new distilleries being built in Scotland, and one of the most recent ones here up in Lewis. So there's no shortage of malt whiskey distilleries. And when the shopper goes out to buy a bottle of malt whiskey, look at what he's faced with. So if we're going to introduce a new malt whiskey to the world, how is ours going to be different? So for example, should we be targeting a different market? Should we be looking at Asia? Everyone's very excited about the growth that the Asian market represents. Or perhaps the more traditional malt whiskey consumer nearer to home. Maybe something a little bit younger. Malt whiskey is seen as a bit old-fashioned, isn't it? Or maybe a whiskey for girls. It's got a bit of a male reputation. So when I was invited to come on board and help to bring this project to fruition, the first thing that occurred to set me thinking was, how is this going to be different? I've spent 30 years traveling the world selling and marketing malt whiskies in all corners of the globe. And so I've seen the choice that there is out there. But I think instantly when someone said, there's a gentleman who'd like to build a distillery in the Isle of Harris, it was one of those moments where you think, wow, what a brilliant idea. Because obviously, the Outer Hebrides is virgin territory for malt whiskey. People haven't built distilleries here in the past. So this is a new frontier for malt whiskies. Malt whiskey drinkers think about different regions, different countries when they're buying their malts. The climate might be quite conducive to building a distillery in Harris. It might not be good for some folk, but actually it's perfect. The coolness and dampness of the Harris climate, we believe, is perfect for maturing single malt whiskey. And of course, Harris Tweed. when people talk of Harris, the first thing that springs to mind is this wonderful brand, this wonderful image of this handmade, artisanal, luxury product, Harris Tweed. So we are given a leg up from the start. And I'll come on later to other ideas that maybe, or a key idea actually, which is the genesis of this thought about building a distillery in the Isle of Harris. Next thing you need for a distillery is somewhere to build it. Finding a piece of flat land in Harris, which isn't peat bog, and has a fine water source, took 3 years in its own. And we were very lucky to find in the village of Tarbert, lying empty for 10 years, was this piece of land that had been filled in by Highlands and Islands Enterprise with a view to creating a new initiative. But nobody had come up with the idea. And just on the hill behind the village is the most wonderful water in Scotland. The softest water for any distillery in Scotland just lies just above the village of Tarbert. Nothing will happen without people. The best ideas are useless without the right people. So we started off, there's just 4 of us at the beginning, and I should start with the genesis of this idea, and I will not lay claim to it, it's not my idea. This gentleman on the left here, Anderson Bakewell, has been connected to Harris for 50 years, and has looked sadly as, over that time, the population of Harris has more or less halved, as young people like yourselves decided that there wasn't a future here. And he saw initiatives come and go, and some of these initiatives lasted, and some didn't last. And he kept wondering, what could you do that would last? What kind of idea, what kind of product or service is going to last, not for years, not for decades, but for generations? And the other thought he had was, this island is so beautiful, wouldn't it be great if you could bottle it? And it was those 2 ideas that came to this man, who's not a whiskey drinker, and this eureka moment was, well, it's got to be a distillery. He was helped in the early days by Alison McKinnon, who is married to a Herach, and who it comes from the background of whiskey operations. So she's a whiskey making expert. Ron McKechran, who's a scalpach, but that's okay. He's our finance director, so he's helped us with the financial fundraising and is a member of the board. And there's myself from a sales and marketing background. So a really nice complementary team who worked together over 3 to 4 years to put this plan together, raise the money, and get the distillery built. Next thing you need, yawn, is a business plan. So if you want to go out and get some money, you need to convince people that you know what you're going to do. I won't bore you with this, but there's a 40 to 50 page business plan behind this distillery venture. And one of the interesting things, as you can see at the top, this is a business plan that lasts till 2029. And there aren't many business plans that go out 5 years, let alone 15 years. So you can see the long-term nature of the whiskey business. So you might need some money. Now, building a distillery in the Outer Hebrides is about as expensive as it can get. This is a long way from the mainland. Everything has to be transported here. The cost of labor is higher. The cost of logistics is higher. So we're going to need a lot more money than you normally would. Because the vision of this project was not just about creating 20 jobs at the distillery, but it was also about this distillery. If it was successful, the vision is that it would actually act as a catalyst, that other ventures might come on the back of it, that we'd bring more tourists to the island, and also, perhaps alongside other premium brands, and I can see some around the room today, start to help to create this reputation of Harris and Lewis for really fine products. So we went to the government with this vision, and they listened very well, and we were fortunate enough to be given the biggest ever award for any food and drink business in Scotland, to the tune of nearly £2 million. And on the back of the announcement of that award, we were able to publicise that, and that attracted some key individuals, and we ended up with 17 individual people from 4 continents, from Asia, from America, from Europe and the UK, as well as the Scottish government money. And we raised just about £10 million, which was the money we needed to be able to build the distillery and run it for the next 8 or 9 years before it's likely to make a profit. clearly, it's all about the taste. We're going to create a malt whiskey. There are hundreds of whiskies already out there. Ours has to be really special. So how is it going to taste? The great thing is, and they don't try this at home, it really is easy to make whiskey. All you need is barley, water, some yeast, and one of these copper stills, and then some wood to mature it in. So making whiskey is easy. Making really good whiskey is really, really difficult. So we spend a lot of time considering, talking to experts, and designing, if you like, how would we like our whiskey to taste? What should an Isle of Harris whiskey taste like? And we took inspiration from the place and from the people to design what we believe the character of the whiskey will be. And of course, there's some science to this, but there's also a lot of art and a lot of fortune. So at the end of the day, what will come out of the barrel, what will go into the bottle, we can only tell to a certain extent. Then we need to design our distillery. So we found an architect in Glasgow, very, very good architect in Glasgow, and we said to him, we need to build a distillery, we called it, of architectural merit. It's got to look lovely, but most importantly, it's got to be in keeping. It's going to sit in the middle of a traditional village, and it's got to feel natural. It's got to feel as if it should always have been there. Then the engineers have to get to work. They have to design how this building is going to stand up, how it's going to operate. Every aspect of every room we need to work out. How many people are going to be sitting in the office in 4 years' time when we've built it? How many people does it need to operate the distillery? Where does all the plant go? Huge amount of development work in developing something as comprehensive as a distillery. It's a very complicated building. We then need builders and engineers to build it. So we have a Glasgow-based contractor who's employed a lot of local people in the 12 months since he's been building the distillery. We have engineers, we have structural engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers. We have quantity surveyors, and of course the architect who leads what we call the design team. This was the plan. This runs to pages and pages. You can imagine the complex detail. There are computer software programs that will have designed that distillery down to a rivet, 2 millimeters wide, and up to the full building itself. So phenomenal amount of detail, technology, and engineering has gone into it. So that's the background. We raised the money finally. It took us 2 years to raise the money. We thought it would take 6 months. A recession appeared at the same time, which wasn't helpful. But we raised the money. On the 3rd of March 2014, we started building. So this is the site. This is where we were 15 months ago, the first porter cabins arriving on the site. As you see, looking out into the Minch. And that's where we are today. So quite a lot of progress. I'll just talk you briefly through these buildings, how this works. So if you look from left to right, on the far left, the larger building towards the back, that's the distillery building. So inside that building itself is nearly £2 million of equipment. Lots of Kenny's toys, stills and vats and pipes and vessels to make whiskey and to make gin. And then the front part of that same building are the offices and the guest area. It's where we will welcome our guests. We don't call them visitors, we call them guests. And then these two buildings adjacent to here, on the far right, is the bottling hall where we will bottle our spirits, and to the left is a warehouse where we will store and mature some of our whiskies. So the idea is that we will make all of our products from start to finish. They will be true Harris whiskies, Harris gins from beginning to end. There are a few more views of the distillery. So as you approach from on the ferry into Tarbert, that will be your first view. And at night, this ribbon of glass, as we call it, will light up and should give some pretty spectacular effects as you arrive in the village. So the front, this copper-clad facade is quite a feature. Somebody mentioned that if this had been in Glasgow, it wouldn't be there now. And here we are as we speak, starting to do the exterior landscaping. And what you don't see, it looks wonderfully calm outside, but in there are 30, 40 people beavering away like mad, doing all of the internal works and leading to the interior fit-out, which we'll come on to a little bit later. And that was the computer model that told us what the final distillery should look like. So hopefully we're pretty close. I mentioned earlier about the idea and needing a big idea to make your product stand out from the rest. I'll stand back for a minute and I'll give you 2 minutes on marketing and brands. So people buy things for 2 reasons. They buy things for rational reasons, logical reasons, and they buy things for emotional reasons. When you're buying a packet of salt, it's largely rational. When you're buying a bottle of malt whiskey, it's probably largely emotional. When you're buying a piece of Harris Tweed, Harris Tweed handbag, it might be emotional and rational. So when you're developing a product, you need to think about these 2 things. And you need to make sure that you've got really exciting things to say about both aspects of this. So the rational reason to buy our malt whiskey will be that it's distinctive, it's interesting, it's different, it's been made in Harris, it's the first distillery in Harris. What's it going to taste like? That we've put the best quality ingredients from start to finish and the best quality processes from start to finish. On the emotional side, we've got this wonderful place. And we've got, above all, the vision of the distillery. So this idea, that I think is unique in world terms, we're the first distillery, I think, that has been built with the purpose of helping to regenerate an economy, about giving employment, about creating a sense of pride in its inhabitants. And this, for me, as a marketing person, is really exciting because I think this is a story that people will want to hear and people will want to connect with. People will want to be part of it. So we've nicknamed ourselves the social distillery. And so we position ourselves, if you like, versus all of those other malt whiskies that you can see in the shelf a little bit differently. So we went to the graphic designer and we said, this is what we're about. Can you design us a logo? So this is what he came up with. And this is symbolic, this H. So the blue on the left, the blue pillar represents the water, the softest water of any distillery in Scotland. And the grey on the right is the bedrock, the Lewisian gneiss upon which this water flows, which makes it the softest water in Scotland, upon which the distillery is built. And it's the 3 billion years of history that makes this island what it is. And in the right, across the centre in red, the red represents heat to make whiskey. You need heat to distill whiskey. But it's also primarily the hearth. It's about welcome. It's about Harris hospitality and the warmth of the people who live there. We have an alternative version of that, so we call ourselves a social distillery. You talk about links and connections. This is all about connections. It's all about people from Harris meeting people from around the world, about the distillery hopefully taking the image of a Harris and the idea of Harris around the world and encouraging more people to connect with Harris and come here physically. And some of the people of Harris we've captured. So we've got our own photographer who we commission to take photographs of the local inhabitants, the people who are going to bring the langoustine into our canteen, and the peat for our malted barley. And this young gentleman here is the son of our shop manager down in South Harris. So the people of Harris are what's going to make this special. So we have a team in place. We've recruited entirely from the local population, and that's really exciting. And that's what we set out to do. And it wasn't difficult because there are so many talented people on the island. You can see the roles that we have in the distillery cover more or less everything from production. You might be interested to see that it only takes 4 people to make the whiskey. And actually a lot of the employment comes in what we call the guest team, who are going to look after our guests when they come and visit us, and also the administrative side of things. So there's the Tarbot 10, as we call them. And fine body of people, I'm sure you'll agree. Now, the business strategy. This is a world preview, by the way. No one's seen this bottle before. So the business strategy is in three parts. First and foremost, it's about our single malt whiskey, which is going to be called the Herach. I don't know if I'm getting the pronunciation right yet. I keep practicing. So the Herach single malt whiskey, because it embodies Harris, it's all about the people of Harris. That's why we've called it the Herach. And first and foremost, we will invest in creating the best malt whiskey in the world. That's Kenny's task. And secondly, it's all about the consumer. It's all about the end user. So we think constantly about creating thousands and tens of thousands of connections with consumers around the world. These consumers might be malt whiskey lovers. They might actually just be residents of Harris. They might be the diaspora of Harris. They might be people who are connected to Harris Tweed. They might be just people who've come to visit Harris for the first time. So we want to create lots and lots of connections directly with consumers, hopefully meet as many as we can. But what's wonderful is that the world of social media gives us an opportunity to make thousands of connections online. And if we make those connections rich and interesting, then we can also develop relationships with consumers even if we don't get to meet them. And thirdly, what we call our supporting revenues. So it's going to take us years until the whiskey's ready to be put in a bottle. That bottle that I showed you there has been designed but not produced yet. It will only be made when our whiskey's ready. So at the moment it's in a filing cabinet and it will come out when we're ready to bottle our whiskey. In the meantime, what we can do is we can generate cash in other ways. But every time we do something that's going to generate money in the short term, it has to support that end goal of the whiskey. So it's got to be of excellent quality, it's got to be interesting, it's got to be innovative, it's got to be special. So our Isle of Harris gin, containing an ingredient from Lewis, actually. So we have some bottles over there, again, sneak preview, and the team can talk to you about what's going to make our Isle of Harris gin special. And I think you went to see Hebridean seaweed yesterday, some of you, and that might give you a little clue as to what's going to go into this gin and make it really distinctive. Another idea, so if you don't know what to buy Dad for Christmas, he can have his own barrel of Isle of Harris whiskey, just for £2,500. It's a snip. And then he can have it bottled when he wants to, and we'll put his name on the barrel. And all of those barrels, so we're selling 200 of our first year's casks, and we'll put them in that warehouse that I showed you earlier, and then they will be bottled at the time of choosing. So that's an idea which creates really great connections. And lots of people are clubbing together. There are at least, I think, 100 people in Lewis who have clubbed together in different consortia to buy themselves a barrel of Isle of Harris whiskey. And that's fantastic. That creates connections and links and friendships that will last for years to come. Another idea which we have just launched is we call it the 1916, and again, we can describe that to you later. But that's a way that you can pre-order the first bottle of the Herach ahead of time, so that when it's produced in a few years' time, you'll be one of the first. And there's lots of other benefits that you get if you sign up to the 1916. And if anyone can guess why the 1916, there's a prize. How many people live in Harris? So in terms of marketing, we have to communicate. We've got to get the word out there. So there are traditional ways of doing that. So we have a public relations campaign where we put out press releases, we talk to the press constantly, and every time there's something to announce, we talk to them and we get lots of publicity. People seem to think it's an exciting idea. And they start to use the word social distillery. So this thought that we're different, that we are somehow distinctive, is getting out there around the world. But as I mentioned earlier, social media is a really exciting opportunity for us. So we started with our website, which we hope is distinctive and interesting, which we constantly update. Every Friday afternoon, we post a newsletter on there to update people on progress, and we send out that newsletter to, I think, 1,200 people now every week, and that number is growing week on week. And that is now complemented. The great thing about social media, it's wonderfully measurable. So This is Google Analytics showing us how that website traffic has been growing since we launched it a year ago. And it really is now starting to gather excellent momentum. Facebook is also important. There are people who don't use websites anymore, apparently, so they now use Facebook. But now I've discovered that people don't use Facebook anymore, so we're now having to move on. So the next thing will be Twitter, stroke Instagram, and this will continue to evolve. And I think as Isle of Harris distillers, jumping on the social media bandwagon has been a challenge, certainly for somebody of my generation. So we took a long time before we jumped in there to think, how would Isle of Harris distillers do it differently? Because a lot of rubbish goes into social media, I have to say. And so we really take care to try to make sure that our communications are thought through, considered, and hopefully interesting. So we talked about the team earlier. Now, the production team, led by Kenny there, so practicing peat cutting in Harris, very important part of the job. But from a diverse range of backgrounds. As you can see, from electrical engineering, house building, joinery, crofting, asset management, but none of them have ever made a drop of whiskey before. And this is really exciting. So the whole team of 4 have gone off to the mainland. They've been working in distilleries. They're being supported by consultants. We have a strong training package in place. We've been helped by Skills Development Scotland, who've helped to fund our training. And what we lack in experience, we more than make up for in extraordinary versatility and enthusiasm. And that's one thing that has staggered me in my very, very short experience in the Outer Hebrides. And that's something I really have never experienced before. And I've run quite big teams on the mainland. But to find people who are just so versatile, so able to change, so hands-on, if you like, willing to try anything, and passionate about their island. And I don't know if any of you actually appreciate that that is a huge opportunity for you here, and something which is really special and doesn't exist in many places. So inside the distillery today, it's still a building site, but that gives you a glimpse. If you remember that ribbon of window from the sea, so that's what it looks like from the inside. These wooden vessels, you can only see about 1/3 of those. 2/3 of it is below that mezzanine floor. And these are the big tanks called washbacks. And they are going to hold a strong beer that we're going to make from malted barley, which is added with which yeast is added. And then after that, they then move into our pot stills, which we're very, very proud of. The beautiful pot stills, 2 pot stills to refine that beer, turn it into spirit, a double distillation, and then out at the other end will come, hopefully, a very fine, delicate spirit, which is, you might not appreciate, completely clear when it comes out of the still. It's not golden. That golden colour will only come from maturing it in oak barrels. And those oak barrels, other than the 200 that will be maturing on site in Tarbert, will be in this building here. Possibly the most beautiful warehouse location in the world, I think, in Ardhasaig. We've just finished building it, and we're starting to fill it with materials now, ready to receive the first casks. And then finally, when the whiskey's ready in a few years' time, we'll bring it back to Tarbert, and we have our bespoke semi-automated bottling line that will put the whiskey into the bottles and apply the labels and the corks in a way that humans would find difficult. And moving on to the guest team. So as I say, we've banned the word visitor centre because we think so many visitor centres do things so badly, and there's something so special about Harris hospitality and the way they welcome people that we just call them guests. And we don't think that our guest team will need a huge amount of training in that because hospitality just comes naturally. So there's Shona with her team, and they also come from a variety of backgrounds. Customer service, one of them's an ex-banker, administration, some linguist, and hospitality management and catering. So we have lots of expertise here and lots of experience and a diverse range of people. Just a quick glimpse what the inside of the building will look like. So our guests will come in through this front door here, and hopefully they'll be welcomed not by a cold reception desk, but by a glowing peat fire as a kind of symbol of welcome. And that blue wall there is a feature made entirely of Harris tweed, which we're quite excited about. Just behind there is a shop selling a range, and not a large range, but a small range of really interesting items. We've got a few examples over on the table over here. Items that have got some connection to the distillery, that have been made for us, or have been made with ingredients from Harris. Lots of interesting, eclectic ideas that we've got that connect people to the distillery and to what we're trying to achieve. If you want to go on a distillery tour, you can pay £10 and you'll go on a very special tour. It'll take time. We have not got any audio-visual materials, so you won't sit and watch a film. What you will do is you'll meet, hopefully, a local guide, somebody from Harris, somebody who can tell you as much about living in Harris, about the culture of Harris, as they will about making whiskey. And if you're hungry or thirsty, we have our canteen. Deliberately called a canteen. It's not a cafe, so all of our staff will have their lunch in here, and hopefully they'll mingle with our guests as well. And so the guests will have a real feeling that they've come into a working distillery that welcomes people, rather than a visitor centre. So, that's the end of the presentation. So I've either achieved one of three things. I've either given you a fantastic opportunity to nod off after lunch, or I've completely overwhelmed you with too much information, or maybe there was something in there that made you think, ooh, I could do that, or I'd like to do that, and I'd like to do it here in the Outer Hebrides. And if you'd like to ever talk to any of us about opportunities, we are really passionate about recruiting young people. We have our full team in place at the moment, but Shona and Kenny are already starting to think about, once we're operational, can we think about modern apprenticeships? Can we think about how we can bring young people close to the distillery? So do come and talk to us either today or give us a call and come and see us in Tarbert. We'd be delighted to see you. So thank you very much for your time and attention.